So this is an article written by Kumi Kapoor. Kumi Kapoor is a very old veteran journalist. So she's trying to balance the pettiness of Indian politics and the role of Indira Gandhi in liberation of Bangladesh. Okay, so 1971 is the year we helped Bangladesh to gain independence. So this topic comes under your GS paper 1, post-independence consolidation. So it's a self-explanatory article that, whatever Indira Gandhi has done or how she has balanced her energy with both domestic politics and with international relations. So the context is very, very important. In 2021, we don't know what happened in 2020, right? So people who are preparing right now, or the present day generation, has no clue whatsoever on what happened in 2010. So 1970 is purely myth or something very, very far. So what happened? You have to understand it from the context of 1947 rather than from the context of 2021. In 1947, India got independence. From 1947 to 1970, how India was looked at by the world. India was looked as a state on the verge of failure. India was looked as a dark continent. It's like India is there, India is there. It's not even a major part of discussion. So such was the remark of India. Okay, nobody actually took India very seriously. In such time, braving Nixon or Henry Kissinger, so it's such a great step by Indira Gandhi. So if you look at the world history, there is this guy called Henry Kissinger. He also won Nobel Prize for peace for Vietnam War. The thing is, he's the most powerful foreign secretaries in the world at that time. Okay, he shaped foreign policy more or less. Okay, so if Indira Gandhi is about to help Bangladesh, right? USA, the superpower back then, threatened India that we will, take action against you. So if you look at it from foreign policy point of view, the step just before 1971, okay, India and USA started becoming close. USSR, sorry. India and Russia became close. So that gave a kind of confidence to India to stand against US. Yes, right. So the non-allied movement is technically biased towards USSR, Russia. Okay, that is one understanding that we can develop. So 1971 is a landmark in your foreign policy or in India's thought process. That is the day when India realized its true potential, or India stood up to great powers. So we entered the realistic domain of international relations. So that's one thing. Independence and domestically also, the success that Indira Gandhi enjoyed in 1970 war probably led to the arrogance of the further emergency and all those things. So psycho fancy is something that Indians celebrate. We have this worship of individuals. Okay. So even if you see today, there are temples for a lot of celebrities, movie actors, politicians. So this worship of individual is never, and Congress has done PhD. So BJP is only learning those tricks now from Congress. So Congress is always master in bhajan. Okay. So that is why he mentions the statement, Indra is India, India is Indra. India is Indra, Indra is India. So the bhajan has extended to that level where everything is done by either Indira Gandhi or no one. Okay. So what we see in 2021 is not something already been repeated in 1970s itself. Okay. So what she's trying to tell you is the entire story of how India helped Bangladesh. But the more important themes for UPSC discussion is how it helped our foreign policy, how it has affected our domestic politics, and the third one, the magnanimity of Indians. What is wrong in praising the opposition, right? Never ever hate the person, hate the policy. Okay. The moment you start hating Indira Gandhi, what happens is you become petty, right? Petty means by not taking her name or not, celebrating their birthdays or death days because they are opposition party members and all these things. You are reducing them to a name. She is also a prime minister of the country, right? You may or may not like it, but she was once a prime minister of this country. So you're respecting the post rather than the person, right? You're acknowledging the contribution of a prime minister of India rather than a particular individual. So just by praising an opposition leader, your greatness won't come down even a bit. It might even increase, but not decrease. But that is not something that present day politicians, all spectrums, not only anyone, as she mentions in the last paragraph. Okay, the psychophancy of BJP, the Congress, right, or BJP workers. Okay, they started celebrating individual leaders like with larger than life pictures. So that is not going to help the system. What is even better is celebration of collective energies. Indira Gandhi did not go to the border and fought, right? It was a contribution of all the leaders. But that is how politics work. When the entire missionary works, the credit is taken by the leader. When the missionary fails, the blame is also taken by the leader. So that is why bureaucrats are supposed to be neutral. So that is how we are supposed to look at the things, not through bhajan or psycho fancy. That is not good for democracy. So it's a good article. If you haven't read it, you can read it for the revision of post-independence consolidation. It will help you understand how Bangladesh liberation was possible. So she also this article also mentioned field marshals in the country. Only 2 people, right?
KM Karyappa and
Sham Manaksha. Only 2 people. So they are considered as greats in Indian Army, the legends in Indian Army. So such people were also there during her time, and they have agreements and disagreements, and finally they prevailed. So military suggestions were also celebrated during their time, but later they were spinned in the favor of leaders. If you see the Balakot surgical strike, after the Balakot surgical strike, Prime Minister Modi gave a press conference where he said, I suggested them to move under the clouds, over the clouds. So you understand it, right? So nothing in 2020 is new. Everything has already happened in this particular country. Okay. There is one more article. This is about killing in the name of political parties. See, this is a sad state of affairs. On the top is the Rahul Gandhi or BJP, that the love or hate towards a particular leader, okay, actually trickles down to the bottom level, right? So the victims are at the bottom level. The hate that is manifested at various levels is reflected at the bottom level. See, civil disagreement is something. Civil disagreement means
people at the local disagreement.
I can shout on you at any decibel. Okay, that does not mean I have the permission to raise my hand towards you. Agree with you. I can raise a very civil disagreement. Like I will counter you with 10,000 arguments. You counter me with 10,000 arguments, whether logical, illogical, cherry picking, or whatever. But the thing is, it's just a oral disagreement. But if you see West Bengal, Kerala, or many states, okay, political killings are a common phenomenon. Even if you take Smriti Irani's case, Smriti Irani won Uttar Pradesh elections, right? She became a minister. The very next day, a very powerful sarpanch who helped gain a lot of votes for her was killed in the very next morning. Okay, so the thing is, grassroots level, this hate towards hate against another political party is not good because it leads to a lot of killings. So we should all condemn very severely any kind of political killing is wrong. Right, so that is a very, very wrong thing that is happening in Kerala, and this editorial rightly discusses. Yesterday in Hindu front page also there was an article that political killings are happening in Kerala. That's a dark mark. So if the culture of Kerala is saying we are communally very solid, we have solidarity, then the outcome should also be in a solidarity fashion, not in a hatred fashion, because hate only gets more hate. An eye for an eye make the whole world blind. So this is going to escalate, not de-escalate, right? So wrong is wrong, whether it's BJP. You may disagree with BJP as much as you want, but that does not justify killing at any cost. The same is true for other political parties also. Right. Again, this is Russia, India, Russia. So in IR syllabus copy, if you see your IR syllabus copy, there are 4 lines in your IR syllabus copy. The fourth line says any agreements, policies, or anything that affects India's national interest. Affects India's national interest. Explicitly in UPSC syllabus copy, a line is mentioned which affects India's national interest. What is the line says?
Effect of policies and politics of developed and developing countries on India's interests, comma Indian diaspora.
Comma Indian diaspora. So India's national interest. So this article's crux is how USA and USSR are dealing with each other and what are the ramifications for India. So this is a very nice article that directly fits into that particular syllabus line, which says how does India benefit or lose if Russia and USA are having a friendship or a issue. So who are the major players as a player in both Asia and Europe? That is why called as Eurasia, right? Europe and Asia. Russia has an influence both on Europe and Asia. So Eurasia. So Russia dominates that center part. So Russia has a lot of influence on Central Asia, right? Europe and Russia have some kind of influence on China, Pakistan, India. So Russia is a major player which is indispensable in multiple fronts. And apart from this, Russia has one major issue, that is accommodation with USA, the hyphenation with USA. That fascination with USA or West has always eluded Russia. Russia always wanted to be friends with West. Okay, but because of its actions, West has imposed a lot of sanctions on Russia. Okay, so if you see present day scenario, what are the major takeaways from this particular article? The major takeaway is if USA and Russia are normalizing the relations, nothing new, right? If Russia and USA are normalizing the relations, that will definitely benefit India. Not only directly India, whether it's in Iran, whether it's in any other sphere, India, whenever some other country which fool to believe that China is a good partner. Even Russia knows that. But Russia do not have any other friends. So Russia is trying to get as much as possible out of the deal with USA and the Western countries. So all these countries are trying very hard to rebalance the geopolitical strategies. The summary is simple. Post-COVID, everybody realized we need a new kind of world order. We cannot have a same kind of world order. We cannot give more power to China. That much is realized or understood by every country in the world. At the same time, every country also realized if we keep our egos first, okay, then growth next. Okay, if pandemics like COVID or something happen, we are going to be at the receiving end. So it's high time that we rebalance the global order, right? So that's the major, most important takeaway. And if you don't read the entire article also, these two paragraphs, because we have discussed the same thing in Russia time also, in 2+2 dialogue summit time also, the major takeaway is this. India is very pragmatic to understand that I cannot influence what is going to happen between USA and Russia. I am nobody when it comes to Russia or USA relations. It's their headache. But the most if they work it out, if they solve their issues, the direct beneficiary will be India. Okay. And at the same time, as I just said, in the past, Delhi's strategic enthusiasm towards Moscow was shaped by India's difficulties towards the West. Whenever I had a problem with the West, my close friend is Russia. Right, USSR. That means if America is not giving me weapons, who will give me weapons? Russia. So like this, my relationship with Russia was more or less decided by Western sanctions or Western behavior. But right now, I am very pragmatic to know that my strategy is more important.
Then at that time, this is contradicting, right? At that time, we thought the Russians helped us during 1971, so we have to help Russia. Like we have to give them, they gave us, so we have to give that way. But here we are being pragmatic.
No. Even that time I said, just because they helped us in the past, that does not mean we should help them. Irrespective of whether they helped or not, India's behavior is to help everyone if it is in a help. Because someone has helped us in the past. Okay, so that's point number one. Hello. Okay. Yes, I wanted to be part of a call center scam, but they didn't answer. Okay. Yes. Yeah. So the summary is we will be friends with everyone. It's not like we will be friends with only those who have helped us, or if we have any work with them. It's not like that. And especially Russia has helped us more, we will be even more considerate towards Russia. Okay. Now observe the last paragraph. Delhi knows the stabilizing the Asian balance of powers will be difficult without a measure of US-Russia cooperation in Europe. This is not at all a favorable scenario for India. It's not like the world is divided into 4 blocks and people are willing to join. So it doesn't work out like that. Yes, Russia is also very, very cautious. Russia have a lot of cards to play. So Russia will be very careful to entertain Chinese, because once you entertain the Chinese, there is no going back. Okay, so what does that line says? The line simply says this: if Russia, Rick and BRICS, again, Rick is mostly for this Central Asian domination, right? Russia wants to keep its relationship with the Central Asian countries. So Russia, India, and China. Russia is trying to rebalance the West also. It is sending a message to the West saying that we have our own alliance where we can dominate the sanctions. See, it's purely for Russia's strategic autonomy. If you think about it, what does Rick actually achieve? Russia, India, and China. It helps Russia still control the Central Asian sphere. When it comes to BRICS, BRICS is not creation of Russia, right? Russia is just playing along with the rest of the countries to show the solidarity. BRICS is more or less a outcome of 2008 financial crisis. When the world was failing, the world wanted some alternative countries. So again, my personal belief is this: everybody will rebalance this accordingly. Even China will tone down sooner than later, because China has understood that by singing too early, it has not done a favor for itself. So Russia will try to rebalance. West will definitely try to rebalance. So everybody will try to rebalance their own relationships with every other country. And sooner than later, Russia and USA will normalize their relations, because if USA is moving in the direction, it will happen. If not now, then later also. Okay.
One thing, the internal politics of US will have a say in.
That's just a temporary phase. Again, if you look at the timelines of international relations, 5 years is nothing. Even if Donald Trump comes tomorrow, okay, we will wait out for the 5 years. After 5 years, relations will be tried to be normalized. Okay. And second thing, if Donald Trump comes back into the power, China will not be happy, because he directly says, I don't like China. He tweets it, right? So it becomes even more problematic. So that's one thing.
Sir, and why these Central Asian countries, why are they interested in Belt Road initiatives?
Because we will discuss that article, right? Okay. So just yesterday, India has gone through something Republic Day 2022. Why the special interest on these countries now? They are all remnants of USSR. They are all part of old USSR. So why the sudden interest on all these countries? Because some of them share direct boundaries with Afghanistan. And we also need the Central Asian market because Central Asia is being dominated by China. According to various editorials, China has $100 billion trade with Central Asian countries, whereas India has only $2 billion. So what is the major takeaway? Because if we have common friends, think about it: Russia, Central Asian countries, Afghanistan, and India. If India have a lot of friends in our immediate neighborhood and the extended neighborhood, automatically a lot of favor will be in the, lot of things will be in favor of India. We don't want to create new headaches. Plus, there is a 5-pillar international relations policy given by Harsh Shingrala, right? 5-pillar policy. In the 1 pillar, he says, using diplomacy as a force multiplier. Using diplomacy as a force multiplier. So we have to use diplomacy for force multiplier, and we have to also use diplomacy for humanitarian gains or humanitarian good or greater good. So India bring pressure on Afghanistan or to use that as a negotiation tactic to control or dialogue with Taliban. Okay. At the same time, I am also using diplomacy for humanitarian good. So if you see the Central Asian Summit, what did India do? India used that summit to promote humanitarian grounds for Afghanistan. Okay. So these 5 countries, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan, all these 5 are called as Central Asian countries or Central Asian Republics, CARs. Okay. So there, what did India do? India had done 2 things. One is yesterday's summit, which was focused on humanitarian assistance. The other was National Security Advisors Regional Security Dialogue. Okay. So both are very important because we are using diplomacy for security and we are using diplomacy for humanitarian grounds. So what are the immediate focus? Humanitarian aid to Afghanistan. We have to increase the trade, same, right? Improving connectivity and preserving the rights, women, children, and minorities. So the first and last points bring more moral authority to the country. Second one is just improvement of bilateral ties. Whenever money flows or wherever money two and 3 are interlinked, 1 and 4 are interlinked. Okay. If we don't do this, if we allow the Afghanistan to flourish as business as usual model, what will happen? The ramification is, as you can see, Afghanistan can spread terrorism into the neighboring countries. And for Pakistan will also be a victim, India will also be a victim. And terrorism anywhere is a threat to prosperity everywhere. So we cannot allow Afghanistan to have a lot of terrorism. Because if you see, terrorism, radicalization, drugs, refugees, these people don't stay within the geographical boundaries. They tend to come into all areas. Yesterday also, or today's newspaper, we have seen a Pakistani boat was captured with around 400 crores of drugs. So once these menaces increase, they will one day or the other come to India also. Now, what are the major issues with Central Asian countries or Central Asian region for India's perspective? The first one is trade. China has a lot of trade. India does not have any trade. Russia have a lot of influence, which if Russia decides to join with China, will be lost on India. Okay. And the last one is Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. All these countries are very much accepting the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. So your question is, why these countries are so? This is Chinese Belt and Road Initiative that is trying to that is trying to cater the world through oil, gas pipelines, ports, railroads, maritime, economic corridors, and Silk Roads. All kinds. Silk Road means natural continental roads. Economic corridors, same, more or less through Silk Roads. Maritime Silk Roads. So China is trying to expand both on the continental through and maritime every way possible. So China wants to have as much influence as possible. the Central Asian countries do not have access to further increase their influence. So using China's Belt and Road Initiative, they will also get benefits, and more or less they are poor countries in comparison to the rest of the world. They are poor countries. If somebody is coming and asking you, do you need a loan? They are more than happy to take that loan. Okay, and they will have access to extended European markets as well. Right? So that's a simple way to understand why China is very much influential in Central Asian countries. Okay. And luckily for us, we have our neighbor that is called Pakistan. So Pakistan has blocked our access to
Central Asian republics.
Afghanistan. Central Asian countries. The map would have been like this. India to Afghanistan, Afghanistan to Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and all these things. But unfortunately, now what is happening? Pakistan has blocked our access through POK. We don't have access through Afghanistan. So India had a land boundary with Afghanistan. Unfortunately, that is blocked by POK. So now what do? We use Chabahar Port. We use Chabahar Port to access the Central Asian countries. Okay. So we have to make all the way to Iran. Iran to Central Asian countries. This is INTC, International North-South Corridor. If you take a railroad, we will enter the Central Asian countries. All this is theoretical, right? Right now, we had some issues with Iran also. That port is also being not properly developed. So again, Iran to Afghanistan to Central Asian countries. So either way, we lost Afghanistan. So Afghanistan here or here is controlled by Taliban. So this is supposed to be one more alternative, the black line. That also is lost. Sorry, my bad. Okay, so this is blocked. This is blocked to India. So technically, India is not having a lot of access to Central Asian countries.
Sir, why Iran thing is blocked? Sir?
Again, you have to enter Afghanistan, right?
Yes.
So
okay.
Afghanistan is blocked. Temporarily, we lost our trump card, that is Afghanistan. We also lost this. We lost this. We don't have this. So we have a lot of legacy issues. Okay. Now, in the same article, they also discuss Trans-Afghanistan pipeline. Now that is also more or less shelved. The term is shelved. Temporarily, we put it on the attic. When your winter is over, you take all your old quilt and all those things, roll it up, put it on the shelf, right? In the same way, whenever Afghanistan is going to Taliban, what will India do? It will roll up all the policies, put it on the shelf. Once summer comes, we will take new bundle. So in the same way, all these are just for writing sake. India has this, India will have that, India will do this, India will do that. We will have to keep things. Slowly, one day, things will make more sense. Okay. So we are giving loans to Central Asian countries. We have North-South Corridor. We have Tapik Gas Line. So this will promote India to connect the region better. So this is also called as a new great game that is happening in Afghanistan. So there are two theories. One is encircling of India. The other one is encircling of Pakistan. Okay. What is encircling of Pakistan? If you see Pakistan, okay, if India has a lot of influence in this region, right? If India has a lot of influence on this region, that means if India takes back the POK, right? If India normalizes the relation with China, Afghanistan, Central Asian countries, and Iran, Pakistan will be blocked with the friends of India. So that is a theoretical fear of Pakistan, because Iran is a good friend of India, India is a good friend of India. Afghanistan, if there is an elected democratic nation, if it is an elected democratic nation, that will also be favorable to India. So then Pakistan will be circled by friends of India. So that is why Pakistan is happy to self-destroy itself towards India. Yes or no? Pakistan is willing to make itself a colony of China. Okay, so just so that this encircling will never happen. Why? It will be like this semicircle. This part cannot be touched. Why? This goes through China. So I have to fight China and Pakistan. That can never happen. You got it, the point? Yes. If you see this, we have our own fear, that is strings of pearl. Strings of pearl is right again as encircling of India. China wants to circle India. Yes or no? In the school, they were denied this chance of playing this game in the childhood. So now they are grown up, they want to play at international level. So what is India's answer? India is also countering with its own strategies. Okay. We are also acquiring our own ports, right? We are protecting grids. So countering the China's string of pearls. So questions like, is India's foreign policy a response to Chinese foreign policy? Have to be analyzed. Are we getting closer to Central Asian countries because China has influence? Or are we making friends with Central Asian countries because we are supposed to make friends? Yes. That is something for analysis. Is everything done by Indian foreign policy a response to Chinese foreign policy or US's foreign policy, or are we doing something on our own? Yes. See, America has withdrawn from Afghanistan, so that is why we have a lot of interest suddenly on Central Asian countries. Right? So, are we in a reactive mode or a proactive mode? That comes only with thinking. All of your PSIR students, right? Not PSIR, anyone? Which option? Maths. The rest all of your PSIR. Very good. Okay. So there is also one more article related to inequality, that there is a huge amount of inequality. See, there are two articles. One is about the problem of women in Afghanistan. Then there is article about inequality. Federalism we will discuss tomorrow. We will see the 4 stages of Indian federalism. Then we will come to this article. So right now we are focusing on this particular article, inequality. So all of you know that there is a recent inequality report. Yes. Inequality has increased in this country, and inequality is not only in terms of wealth. Inequality is there in this country in lot of other forms. What other forms? Gender, social mobility. So gender gap is a major inequality in this country, right? Gender gap. Yes or no? We rank 140 among 156 countries. So gender gap is huge. If you take India's gender gap, there are lots and lots of problems. Female labor force participation, healthcare, literacy ratio, income inequality. So not only money, India is having a lot of inequalities. The other day I told you social mobility also. Social mobility is ability to move within a generation or within their own lifetime through socio-economic strata. That means if you are born into a particular family with certain income, are you able to better yourself by next generations? Or are you staying there only? Right? Say for example, if somebody is born into a cobbler's family, a poor cobbler, right? Is his son able to study, get access to a better job, or he is staying in the caste-based employment only, not by choice. If he wants to do this, that's fine. If he wants to build a better, this, for example, Ramki Bandi, okay, so that is by choice, okay. But if he was forced or he was not allowed to move up the social ladder, that is lack of social mobility. India ranks very bad in social mobility also. So social mobility is a term we use for both socio and economic strata. That means I cannot move out of the family I was born into, or the income I was born into, or the disadvantages I was born into. The reasons being caste, religion, and ethnicity. I'm discriminated on the basis of all these things. I'm not allowed to have access to a lot of things: education, health, lifelong learning. Okay. Apart from this, we also have seen a K-shaped recovery. Yes or no? K-shaped recovery. See, that article is purely talking like how there are income inequalities in the country. We know that inequalities exist. No surprises there. But billionaires have increased in India during COVID disease. So not only this, I repeatedly told you, when we are going through the worst pandemic of a century, Indian stock market has rallied to all-time high. Okay, so that clearly shows the inequality in the nation. Okay, and this is a more software companies became trillion-dollar companies. Trillion-dollar companies became $2 trillion companies. So the wealth only increased for the richest of the rich. And global inequalities will also increase ecological inequalities. So climate change, whenever there is a mismatch in the wealth, that will also accelerate climate change. So climate change, poverty, inequality, all these things affect the poorest of the poor more. Yes or no? The poor are the most vulnerable in all situations, irrespective of any situation you take. Who are the victims? Poor and women. Poor women and children are the victims of climate change, inequality, communal violence, gender gap. You take anything, you write these three people, they are the victims of all formats of inequalities. So there is no surprise on identifying what are the impacts of inequality. As a bureaucrat, it's not your job only to know there are problems. You need to know the impact. Why you need to know the impact? So that you can solve those problems. What are the impacts? Obviously, India's human capital is destroyed. Digital divide, lack of access. If all these things are there, if there is no health, what will the next generation students learn? Right? So recently there was an article in LiveMint which says throughout the world, because of the lack of access to education, COVID years, that means 2020-21, the world has lost, or the next generational incomes has lost $17 trillion. Just imagine, $17 trillion is lost by the next generations because of lack of learnings during this COVID year. Okay, lifelong cost. Okay, $17 trillion is lost. You can imagine the kind of unequal society we have created during COVID pandemic itself. Digital divide, lack of health, access, and all those things. Skills, forget about all such next level things. Skills we don't even think about it. Lack of social mobility has only increased because of inequality. So when we don't have social mobility, we also have a lot of social capital issues. For example, communalism, hatred, conflicts, all these things will only increase because resources, when they are limited, the struggle for resources will only increase. Okay, if you have less government jobs, more and more communities will start demanding for reservations, and that will spill over into political games, that will spill over into a lot of social issues. The more fragmented the society, the better for political parties, right? This is the next logical outcome. Wage inequalities and decreasing. Is there, rich will get richer. They will exploit more resources. Nobody will be able to raise the voice. The exploitation will continue. Inequalities will increase. For example, you can take international examples also. Latin American countries are getting poorer. So they want to explore more oil. They want to destroy more forests. They want to create alternative livelihoods. For example, Amazon forest fires were created by the farmers of Brazil to promote cattle farming. So to remove poverty, they will destroy the environment. They will be totally justified. Now, as all of you know, some steps to reducing inequalities. The most common measure is government should redistribute the wealth. Trickle down theory. That is the most common example you hear throughout the world, right? What should be done? You have to redistribute the wealth. Who will redistribute the wealth? State. It's as simple as that, right? Trickle down theory. When 1991 liberalization happened, who received all the money? India. India received a lot of money. So government assumed that automatically that money will trickle down to the last man in the line. Did trickle down theory succeed?
No.
It failed miserably. In a position to distribute the resources properly. Land reforms of India is a prime example. Do you think land reforms of India is successful? Which paper? GS1 Society.
Land reforms are there. GS2 sir, directly in syllabus line. GS2 land reforms. GS3. What GS2? Land reforms.
Land reforms is in GS3. GS1 post-independence consolidation. Can we think in those lines? So land reforms, the debate is not about which paper, right? The debate is how you are looking at it. Whether you are looking at it from political angle, governance angle, or economic angle. So the ultimate solution is if I have to remove social issues or social problems, I have to have land reforms, land distribution issues. That is also one way to look at it. If I have to redistribute the wealth, then also land reforms are very, very important, both from governance point of view and economy point of view and society point of view also. So it did not work very well because of caste issues again. So if you read land reforms in this country, the best source is Bipin Chandra. There are 3 chapters in Bipin Chandra. After independence. There are 2 books, right? India after independence. So there are 3 chapters, India after independence. So that's a very good source for understanding the land reforms topic. Okay. So like this, we have tried to redistribute the wealth. Progressive taxation is one thing. Even today, government is taxing the rich highly, right? Like 30% slab for the rich of the rich, super rich. If you are making more than 10 lakh rupees, you have to pay 30% of the tax. If you are making up to 10 lakh rupees, we have. So that is a progressive taxation. So all such thought processes are done by the government, but it did not succeed. So then there are radical solutions like taxing the super rich, taxing the rich even more. Okay, like Ambani should be taxed even higher than the rest of the crowd, or there should be one-time, taxation. Like the super rich should be taxed heavily for one time, and that wealth should be redistributed to the rest of the population. So like this, lot of radical ideas are there. Okay.
It had a theory which said that even if we distributed all the wealth of the rich and distributed it among everyone equally, within 1 year times. So it is the individual's prerogative.
So yes, here nobody is going to do that, first of all, right? Nobody can tax the super rich. So all these are only for, as I mentioned, radical solutions. No government with right mind can go for radical solutions. The best solution is always to invest in universal health services. The best and long-term solution is universal health services. If you provide public health services, okay, freely and qualitatively, automatically the wealth distribution will take place. People will rise up and people will start taking the wealth. People will rise up not as in revolt, but they will be upskilled and reskilled, and they will get better jobs. They will have better access to better livelihood. So nobody wants to stay as a driver, right, for the rest of his life. He also wants to scale up in his life. Are we providing that scale up mechanism? That scale up mechanism can be only provided with good health and good education. Next is creation of employment. If the state, after removing all the PSUs, can only focus on employment creation, health, and education, everything else will take place. Everything else will take care of itself. That is the major thing we have to understand. Rest all is only for our mental satisfaction, taxation, things we have to write for answer writing sake. But in reality, if you really have to change the society, the three things are social capital, human capital, and policies. As I told you yesterday, government has to set the tone. Government have to give that direction to the entire society. Like we will explore here, you go in this particular direction, people will take care of themselves. Okay. If you don't create that tone, if you don't give health and education and skills, then everything will collapse. Okay.
So is wealth tax also a radical solution?
Taxing the rich is taxing normal wealth tax is not a radical solution, because it's just, I'm taking, you're gaining extraordinary profits, I'm taking some chunk out of it. So wealth tax is considered as normal taxation. Capital gains and all these things are normal. Okay, taxing the super rich for one time, taxing the super rich like for 1%, the super rich tax. So all these kind of things are radical solutions. They are not suggested. The 1% movement itself in USA have failed, right? More or less. So there was a movement in USA called as 1% movement. That means the people have realized that the 1% richest people in USA have a lot of wealth. So they raised against them as a protest that you are having too much wealth. But that is not the problem of the rich, right? The society had a lot of inequalities. The policies were skewed towards the super rich and they took the money. But still they are doing some philanthropic activities and all those things. But the wealth redistribution can properly happen only when the state will intervene efficiently. Now, this is general. This applies to all the Western countries. But when it comes to India, when you solve economic inequalities, you also have to solve social inequalities. As long as you don't solve social inequalities, even when the wealth falls as a cake, it will be split again into social hierarchies. So in India, we have to solve both social inequalities and economic inequalities. For example, even the land distribution failed because of the caste issues. The Zamindar, the MLA, the police officer, everybody belongs to the same caste. Then automatically the distribution inequalities will be buried by the caste hierarchies. Okay, so this kind of social inequality is very common per problem.
Population has 52% of the wealth, and it says that 40% of the middle class is left with 40% of the wealth. So, what is the end goal of redistribution of wealth? So, like, is it like 100%?
We are not talking about equality, we are talking about equity. Always remember, whenever someone says redistribution of wealth or something like this, it's not the case that I want everybody to have 100 rupees. I don't want to reduce Ambani to my level, right? That should never happen. Everybody should have different levels of income. But the thing is he having equity? That means, is he getting all the wealth he is supposed to get? For example, I'm not giving a job because of a particular caste, religion, or something. That means I'm not allowing you to get the rightful 10,000 you are supposed to earn. Right? That will only continue the inequality. Right? So the policies should be framed in such a way that everybody will get the benefit out of this. Okay. So let's imagine a particular powerful community within a state is dominating all the lands, the political power. Then they will never allow the money to flow into the next communities or different communities. All the power will be taken by them or their families or their friends. Then what will happen? Automatically inequalities will increase, right? So what here everybody means by equality is not equal money, but opportunity to make money or opportunity to live up to best of my potential. For example, if a poorest farmer family wants his son to be a chartered accountant or a doctor, we should have that ecosystem where he should at least have a chance to try. Right? So income distribution is not giving money to the farmer. Income distribution is taking some money to provide that hospital or build that college or build that road where he can travel to the school. You got the point, right? Sure.
When he mentions this, he's showing, I mean, all the both of them are showing it in such a way that the inequality is existing, and that is why the problem is coming from having a wealth, like person having a wealth, like the 10% having the 52% of wealth. Is it wrong? Like,
no, it's again not. See again, there is a wonderful book by Michael Sandel. Michael Sandel is a philosopher. You must have heard about ethics paper, right? Sandel, ethics, very famous topic. Recently wrote a book called as The Tyranny of Merit. Okay. The problem is, let's say the 10% believes, I made this wealth, I made this 52% out of my sheer talent, creativity, or whatsoever. If you read a book called as Outliers, okay, there also it says Bill Gates in 1970s, when he created this Microsoft, he wrote these programs and all these things. He went to a school with a computer. Just think about it. In 1970s, when Bill Gates as a school kid went to a school which had access to computers. Think about it. Okay, so Bill Gates is talented. He wrote a program and he created a world-class company. But is it the merit of the Bill Gates that made him Bill Gates, or is it the system which was skewed towards certain people which helped him become what he became? You get it, right? So the 10% made the 52% wealth because of all the structural inequalities still which existed till now. The inequalities in various formats helped these communities, right, or group of people, and they were standing on the benefits of this inequality. From there, if you are gaining, your argument is correct that it's not morally wrong to have 52% of the wealth. They deserved it. But at the same time, that 52% of the wealth came to you because of all the historical injustices or inequalities. You are not morally blamed for that. Okay? But at the same time, it's wrong to believe that it's your pure talent that made you what you are. Okay? So, now that we have realized that 10% can make 52% of the wealth because of all the access they have, so we have to think about how we can make the same for the rest of the crowd. Right? Yes.
So whatever we can do.
Whatever we can do, if you do that, that is more than enough. I mean, that is extra value addition, right? For example, if you are educating 2 kids because of your wealth, so you are making the life of 2 more kids better. So at individual level, society level, community level, national level, state level, international level, everybody should have that moral obligation to redistribute the wealth at their own capacities. That will also make the world a better place. Okay. My favorite theory of all this is minimum wages and universal basic income. Okay, I say give everybody 5,000 rupees, case closed. All are happy. Not equal, all are happy. See, what will you do with 5,000 rupees? No, we don't know, right? So my favorite theory from last 3 years is India should give universal basic income. Everybody should get 5,000 rupees per month. Every Indian citizen should get 5,000 rupees. You don't want? No?
But it should be given only to the poor or like that.
First, we'll start with everyone.
Everyone that is again, not equity.
You don't want 5,000 rupees? No. Okay. There is a campaign called as Give It Up campaign. So you can give it up. Pahal, just like Pahal, you can say, I don't want, I'm good enough, I'm privileged enough, so I don't want 5,000 rupees from the state. But it should be given to everyone. We should have some experiments in the country, right? Boring. Demonetization time, state took money from us. Now UBI, so that state will give to everyone. So we'll see how it goes. I want India to be the first country which has experimented with universal basic income. History books will remember.
The same line by Varun Provasan.
Okay.
He says that there was a man and he starts receiving like 5,000,
Okay.
10,000, 15,000 in his bank account. And he the same, like two persons with the same name share one single account.
Okay.
So when it comes to the 4, they ask that, aren't you surprised that why are you receiving so much money? He says that Modi said 15 lakhs will be deposited and it is being deposited.
So slowly that money is trickling down. So you see, but again, see, whenever you read something, always remember you have to modify it to India. Whenever people say something like this should be done to India, that should be done to India, always remember when it comes to India, you have to modify it to India. You cannot just say universal basic income will work in India or minimum wages will work in the Western ideas. When it comes to India, has to go through the Indian prism. You have to understand the societal structural inequalities of India. Well, only then the economics will work in India. Directly, the Western economics won't work in India. So remember, social issues plus economic issues go hand in hand. If you take any wrong steps, you are only accelerating inequalities rather than reducing inequalities. That is also a problem with this country. So that is what Hindu, she writes Indian Express article, right? Complex paradoxes are the hallmark of our society. For example, she says, whenever there is a fall in marriage of women, female labor force participation ratio will also fall down. So if more women are getting married at the later age, female labor force participation ratio is also falling down. Okay. Decline in early marriages has been accompanied by falling employment rates that persisted even during 1990 booms. So you are doing a right reform, the outcome might be totally different. If you marry young Indian girls at a later age, that will also have ramifications on female labor force participation ratio. Okay. So as I said, it's very, very difficult to understand how Indian society works and how the mindsets of the people work. One switch, it's not normal, like if I turn on that switch, this light will be switched off. In the next room, fan might get switched on. So anything can happen. So we don't know the ramifications. So that is why in India, the bureaucracy is so status quo loving that it does not want to even touch that wire. Forget about switch. Why? If I remove this, new headache might be created in some other room. So nothing doing. Everything is fine.
But with
you need political capital. You need someone like.
But people say life without risk is like risk. So you start taking risk.
Because the family believes that you are supposed to get a child at within 2 years of your marriage, or the husband is making enough money for both of us. So whenever there is a family increase in the family income, it is assumed that women should drop out from the job. Yes or no? I'm making good enough for both of us. Why do you have to work? Again, as I said, it's the expectations of the society. For example, if you are married, within 2 years of marriage, you are supposed to have a baby or something. Then for the 3 or 4 years, you are pushed away from the labor force cycle. Yes or no? If not, no, it will be too late. There are a lot of social, political expectations, mainly social expectations, right? So automatically it will reduce the female labor force participation ratio.